line in the book in Ascension by Martin McGuinness where he said, "We can only see what we know." And the line resonates with me because it's in line with observations of Theory Laden, quote by David Deutsch. It's in line with epistemology that I've been thinking about in the last couple of years, which is, okay, what is it exactly that we know? What is it exactly that we see? What's the relationship with what we see and what we know? And I keep coming to the revelation that what we see and what we know are two sides of the same coin. We can't separate it, like knowledge and observation, knowledge and experience, experience and knowledge. These things are intertwined. So that brings up the question, well, what comes first? Or, well, how do you generate knowledge? If knowledge depends on what you see, and what you see depends on your knowledge, you see where I'm going here. It's becoming kind of like the loop, the Hofstadterian loop, the DNA that creates itself. And a lot of our existence is like that. So I would say that maybe in a few hundred years, when physicists uncover some new massive law of physics or something like that, they will come back to this loop. I think this loop is certainly part of the game. But that's not the fundamental idea of this conversation here. This conversation is just, a little bit more simple. Okay, look, what is knowledge, right? And the reason the question comes up is you have it in physics, you have it in science, you have it in the hedge fund industry. Let's say, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So clearly we are in the knowledge business. So being in the knowledge business, I think obviously brings up the question, what is knowledge? I think it would be ridiculous not to ask that question. And knowledge, when it comes to us, in particular, Orange Capital Partners, the mission of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. So that connects fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with the concept of knowledge, right? I mean, those are intertwined ideas because you can't have anything fundamentally new if you don't generate knowledge. This is just an assumption that we make, and this is also sort of our basic principle. I don't like the word first principle, but that's where we start from. There's other people. Just as an example, I mean, you could invest in. You could bet on a social change, for example, that which is not based on new knowledge or new technologies, and then short tobacco companies or go long, MSCI, because social change will bring a lot more investment in ESG, and MSCI is the company that creates those indices and so on and so forth. So you could have those types of bets, which is perfectly legitimate in the hedge fund business. There's no law or no particular ethical or moral or intellectual superiority when it comes to making money, at least as far as I'm concerned. We at Orange Capital Partners just chose this way, which is the way of fundamental new concepts and engineering practices. We have an overlay here. We have our principal stack. We spoke about this, so please go back to our podcast series to see what we think in terms of basic fundamental purpose and what's the actual optimization that we're going after. But that's not the purpose of this podcast episode. Today we just want to simply start with the fact that, look, we need new knowledge to create new technologies to achieve certain things, whether it's change our energy infrastructure from carbon to decarbon, or increased level of autonomy in the economy to free up human capital for more purposeful work. Those are the two fundamental ideas that we are after. We need knowledge. And if we can only see what we know, and we only know what we see, we end up in a bit of a tricky situation here, right? The question of what is knowledge. And I want to try to tackle this question here. I don't have a scripted answer. And a lot of these podcasts that I'm doing, hopefully the long-term listeners are okay with that, is that I'm actually developing knowledge while I'm doing it. So this is one of those. And I think when it comes to knowledge, you want to be able to iterate. Like you want to be able to try new things, whether it's in your brain or whether it's explicitly actually doing different things. In a sense, like I always use the star-based example of SpaceX. They literally blow up rockets to learn from mistakes, whether it's FSD, a Tesla that is continuously iterating and taking risks while doing that, whether it's other companies that are physically trying new things, in particular, sort of the tech companies in Silicon Valley are notorious for that. Or it could also be iteration in your brain. I mean, I would say that that's probably what we mean when we say somebody is creative or intelligent or both. It's a person that has the ability and the will and the resources to try new things, right? To go after new ideas, to discover. I think reading The Painting That Shocked the World, for example, which is a story about Picasso and his idea of painting that evolves in a certain time period and culminates in a painting called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. The details are not so important, but what's interesting about this book is the struggle that Picasso went through. And I think that's iteration too, the internal struggle, the trying new things, going out of your comfort zone. So those are the kinds of things that, in my opinion, require, they are the base for knowledge creation. And just as a tangent, I have an intrinsic opposition towards the idea of remote work. This is a tangent, has nothing to do with the actual topic, but it's related. That's why I'm bringing it up. And some people look at me in a weird way because they would say things like, well, I mean, what's the purpose of going to work and commute 2 hours every day? Well, first, most people don't commute 2 hours every day. Second, if you do that, then you're trading off, let's say, space and nice housing for work, right? And that's fine. And then they would say, yeah, but why not have both? And the answer is, I'm not opposed to having both. Of course, I think happy people are the best employees. The problem with remote work, or this idea of being decentralized in general, in my opinion, is exactly the lack of friction, the lack of contest, this creative process of disagreeing with other people or having other people disagree with you. Remote work is very transactional, in particular the way it is today. And there's one example actually of remote work that works really well, which is open source software. And the reason open source software works very well as a remote work concept is because it grew natively like that. So there are institutions within the, let's say GitHub was created for that. There are certain, with institutions, certain rules, certain habits, certain enforcement practices that make it easier for this remote crowd to work in contest and question each other and sometimes fight or refuse or condemn or all these things. They're all part of the game. Yes, we don't like it. Of course, nobody likes to be criticized. But without that, without criticism, without error correction, without being shown the finger, hey, you just made a mistake, you're not going to get better. And if you don't get better, you don't learn. And then you don't create knowledge. So this is just as a tangent. Now back to the main concept. Knowledge creation requires try and error. Now we at Orange Capital Partners, we have a large investment in Tesla, and I think we've learned the hard way what it means to be exposed to a situation like that. I think Elon Musk is the entrepreneur of our time because he is willing to constantly try new things. He's willing to risk mistakes, sometimes at the detriment of his employees and his even the morale in the company. Let's say this is another tangent. If you look at what some people that criticize Musk, let's say Jan LeCun, and no matter if you can take him seriously or not, but he says, let's say your employees are burned out and they don't have the kind of beautiful sunset that you promised them and things like that. There's some truth to that because it's hard. Like if you make mistakes in the Musk ecosystem, you could be chastised. You could be at least singled out as somebody who made a mistake, and that's not really that's not a good thing. Now, of course, Musk has found a way to do that and keep the best and sort of get rid of the rest, kind of thing. But overall, I think it just takes experience. We have to learn to evolve in a situation like that. Musk is doing a decent job, but we as a species, as investors, as employees, as humans, we have to learn how to evolve in a system of constant iteration and error correction. For example, as a parent, I have that same problem as a parent, right? How do I raise my son so he has that ability to try, he has the ability to fail, to make mistakes, get up on his feet, improve, error correct. It all sounds beautiful in theory, but these are hard things. Try to tell a 16-year-old that he's wrong. I mean, we do that all the time at home, and sometimes almost glasses fly around the kitchen. He doesn't like to hear that. He's also an athlete, and there it's even more extreme. Like you have this brutal thing called the scoreboard, and that's probably one of the biggest value added, I think, contributions of athleticism in general. It's this ability to be calibrated, to make mistakes, to learn from mistakes, things like that, which you kind of have to do as an athlete. So I would say, again, knowledge creation is driven by iteration and error correction. So to close the loop now, when we say we only see what we know, then we can also expand on that. We can say, okay, the more we know, the more we see. This will be one corollary of that, which I'm actually on board with that. The more we know, the more we see. So then the question is, okay, how do we know more? How do we gain knowledge? And again, knowledge requires a lot of iteration. And it brings up another question, right? It brings up the question of, okay, let's assume you want to iterate. Let's assume you want to go and learn, right? How much basic knowledge do you need? And take AI as an example. I mean, we can start a model with absolutely zero knowledge. In other words, all the weights are randomly set to 0 or 0.5 or something like that. And then we train the model, and then it starts learning. And then there's the concept of pre-trained model and fine-tuned model. So now, if we translate this concept to the human, we could say the college grad is the pre-trained model, and then we fine-tune her on work or grad school and so on and so forth. So the analogy might actually work on that front. But the question, of course, as a human, if we want to compare humans with AI, is always the AI has the luxury of many, 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 many more iterations. And that's why we humans, we tend to represent knowledge in symbols. We try to cut corners. I think it's not because we're lazy or something. We just we can't do billions in iterations and things like that, right? We might have actually a lot of parameters. If we take one of Jeff Hinton's quotes is, we are way over parameterized. Our brains are extremely over parameterized. In other words, we have a lot of synapses and connections and fairly little data, or if you want to use a reinforcement learning analogy, we have very little epochs, trajectories, and we're able to find the right trajectory very quickly. So that's part of the frontier of AIs, is to find models that can do that similarly. So we don't have to waste this much time and energy and money to train models. But the question, of course, again, is how do you learn? When do you start iterating? So is there a point where you stop learning and you start iterating? And the answer to that is, of course, it's a very blurred line, right? Blurred. I can't say very blurred. You're either blurred or you're not blurred. So I'm sorry for that. So it's a blurred line because there's no hard stop. It's not like by the age of 18 you stop memorizing knowledge and now you go on and learn stuff, right? That's not how it works. I think you have to build that muscle of iteration throughout your career, and you have to build that muscle of capturing the knowledge that is necessary for the kind of iteration you want to do. But that brings us back to the original question, which is I can only see what I know, and I only know what I see. So which knowledge matters? And the more knowledge I gather, the more knowledge I accumulate, the more I see, but I keep seeing the same thing. So how do I iterate, or how do I bring in new experiences with knowledge? There is, I don't know if it's scientifically proven, but it's certainly anecdotally proven that the more knowledge I have, the more narrow I become. You just go and sit in on a seminar at Stanford, which is a fine institution here in the Bay Area, and you have seasoned professors who talk about things. Just one example, several lectures, I have attended several lectures now where engineering professors try to make the case for sort of a control theory engineering approach towards AI. In my opinion, it's a lost battle that they're trying to fight. Like let's have some explicit knowledge in the models. Let's not just be all data driven. When in fact, I just did an episode about this. I think the right approach would be to consider everything a learning problem, and then try to find the right data and the right models to make those things, whatever it might be, whether it's full self-driving or humanoid robot or grasping a bottle or making a scrambled egg or cleaning the kitchen or whatever your optimization problem is, whatever the product or the services you're trying to create with your AI. In the end, just look at it as a learning problem from the get-go. So change your perspective, right? Gain new knowledge in a new area, and don't get stuck with the old knowledge. The concept of sunk cost in economics comes to mind, right? I've invested 30 years of my career. I'm not going to just give this stuff up. A good example of somebody who's doing it the right way, in my opinion, is Jitendra Malik, who has been vocal on several interviews that I've had the pleasure to listen to, or a presentation I attended, where he talks about this, where he says, look, I started as an electrical engineer. I was asked to do certain control theory problems, and then this neural net thing came along, this data-driven learning stuff came along, which is in principle the same thing. It just comes from a different perspective. It says, look, I don't want to use these explicit formulas, let's say a barrier function, to make sure my robot doesn't do certain things. Barrier functions are used in robotics still today by defining, look, you can never, let's say, hurt a person. So you can never get closer than 2 inches to a person, something like that. It could be a barrier function. And what Jitendra means with this learning-based approach is, look, let's not do anything explicitly. Let's try to consider everything a learning problem, see where we get. We can always put safety measures in there, but the safety measures, this goes back to it's almost an ideological question about LiDAR and radar and ultrasound that Musk is so against, because those are all the kind of barrier tools and tools for barrier functions that in the long run shouldn't be there. That's why Musk is so much against it, and that's why the robotics community is still trying to, that's why it's an ideological question. Sorry, that was another tangent, but I just want to get back to the main topic here. So the point is, again, how much knowledge do I accumulate, and when do I deviate from my existing path? How do I know that? I mean, this is the canonical exploration versus exploitation problem in reinforcement learning. So we've seen that before. We've done many iterations on this particular problem. You know, Sutton's book on AI, where he covers reinforcement learning, is probably the gold standard on that. So the answers to that particular problem are actually learning based also. In other words, we don't know exactly. So we're iterating on the question of how to ideally iterate, right? This in itself is an iterative problem where we can error correct and get better, and so on and so forth. So to summarize, there are three topics discussed in this episode. One is we can only see what we know, and we can only know what we see. That's a David Deutschian view of the world, and it's tied even to a Hofstadterian loop, actually, which by itself is worth studying, right? So it's like the DNA, which creates the protein, which creates the DNA. So we have this looping also in knowledge creation, but it still provokes the question, okay, if we can only see what we know, then how do we create knowledge? And the question of knowledge creation is a very interesting one. It's actually epistemology, applied epistemology, if you will, and it starts with iteration. Now, this is my conjecture, that we have to be able to iterate in an exploitation versus exploration type trade-off. It's driven by, there's a cost to exploitation and there's a cost to exploration, and it's up to the individual, up to the company, up to the university, whoever is applying the knowledge creation task, to find the right balance. But there has to be a healthy amount of iteration and exploitation. So whenever you're exposed to a situation where there is too much of the one versus the other, you have to absolutely be careful. Because the third thing, and this is the main conclusion, is really that wealth creation as an idea, or progress, or making the world a better place, no matter how you want to look at this situation, it requires knowledge creation. Wealth and knowledge are two sides of the same coin. And knowledge creation is predicated on iteration and exploitation. And the right balance is an optimization problem. It's a Pareto optimization problem. But what I mean with that is there's a certain Pareto frontier. It's neither only this nor it's only that. And you need to have maybe an overarching optimization function, or a purpose, if you will, that guides your progress in that field. So if you have a company which iterates all the time, then maybe they just don't know what they're doing. And a company that only does exploitation is too complacent. It has to be a balance. It's a Pareto optimization problem. And with solving that problem, you create more knowledge. That means you can see more. That means you generate more wealth, because wealth, defined as in a David Deutschian way, is the amount of possible transformations. The more knowledge you have, the more possible transformations you enable, the more wealth you have. Thank you.